am Saeed Alavi, an RDA board member, and I welcome you to the first lecture in the RSA RDA fall series entitled Seriously Cute, organized by Andrew Colopy, assistant professor at the Rice School of Architecture. This lecture series is part of the school's fall programming that includes lecture at Ferry Gallery. You are all invited. Please see RSA website for more details. We are sorry for any inconvenience caused by having this lecture on Rosh Hashanah, but due to the schedules, it could not be avoided. Please take a moment to view the list of our generous 2015 underwriters and lecture sponsors for this series. Please give them a hand. We also thank the Rice School of Architecture and Dean Sarah Bitting for their continued support of our organization and mission. And we are grateful to the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, for the use of this wonderful auditorium. I'd also like to recognize and thank tonight's reception sponsor, Cheryl Kolasinski, please. This lecture series will continue on Wednesday, October 14th with Mark Linder, a professor from Syracuse University, and he will be followed by the final speaker, Jimenez Lay, the following Wednesday. For more information on our programs, please visit our website at www.risedesignalliance.org. Also a reminder to those logging your CEUs, the registration lists are located on the tables at the entrance to the auditorium. Tonight, as a courtesy to our speaker, please silence your cell phones and do not use flash photography. And now, Andrew Colopy will introduce our speaker, Ms. Farshid Moussavi.
Thank you, Said, and good evening. Before we begin, I want to mention that there were some technical difficulties with the setup this evening, but our guest has graciously agreed to power through, but I just want to apologize if there are any hiccups. I also want to convey my sincere appreciation to the Rice Design Alliance, to Linda Sylvan, Mary Beth Wojcik, RDA members and sponsors, as well as to my colleagues at the Rice School of Architecture, especially Dean Sarah Whiting. I am personally grateful for their efforts in making tonight's lecture possible, but I also want to acknowledge their dedication to ensuring a civic forum for the betterment of our built environment. I suspect that when you first learned of tonight's lecture series, you felt compelled, maybe just a little, to smile. Cute. The word alone is enough to affect you. Then you may have experienced a moment of cognitive dissonance. After all, architecture is supposed to be serious, to embody beauty, order, and bigness. Certainly nothing cute. In some respects, the cute needs little introduction. It has long been identified as an evolutionary adaptation, compelling us to care for our kids. The affect is so strong that we easily associate it with a wide range of visual cues. Put simply, just about any pleasant resemblance to childhood is cute. This youthful affiliation and our tendency to equate size with significance lends to the perception that cuteness is unimportant, even though the effect of motivating us to care about something is well documented. So why does this matter to architecture? Well, the cute is not limited to childlike affiliations. Nearly anything can be cute, if seen as a smaller, simpler version of something familiar. Now let us suppose that architecture is not as big as it once was. As technology allows us to experience the world at a global scale, buildings are diminished. Likewise, they may appear less complicated. As we tumble through them, pinning and posting images, the depth of our experience is reduced, its complexity simplified. Architecture in this condition is less empowered by bigness and complexity, and so must create novel forms of engagement. Here, the cute may find relevance, an aesthetic frivolous only in appearance, not lacking power, just concealing it. Through the small and the simple, the cute actually promotes attention and interest. Imagine for a moment, might we be compelled to care more about the built environment if architecture could be seriously cute? The lectures in the series, however, are not a survey of cute architecture. Rather, they are meant to draw our attention to significant changes occurring in relation to architectural practice and experience. In particular, a turn to affect and image that make such speculations possible. Some ask that we reconsider long-held assumptions about the discipline, opening the possibility for new architectural and urban effects. The lectures offer nothing less than new ways to see and to affect the world. Few architects are more engaged in shaping that world than Farshid Moussavi. In her exhibition for the 2012 Venice Biennale entitled Architecture and Its Affects, Moussavi states, and I quote, "Affects in buildings are the ground through which architecture must now engage with everyday life and culture. Whereas historically architecture strove towards meanings for such a ground, comprehension of meanings requires a shared understanding that does not exist in today's plural society. Affects engage people through aesthetic perception, and therefore the aspect of forms through which architects influence without determining and limiting people's experience." Moussavi's work and research, especially a series of publications over the past decade, most recently The Function of Style, stake a position for affects' architectural relevance. The word contributes to a broader shift in the humanities and social sciences, as we have sought to better explain the societal role of emotion and intuition. Educated in London at the Bartlett and at Harvard, Moussavi worked in the offices of Renzo Piano and Rim Koolhaas prior to co-founding Foreign Office Architects. FOA promptly won a competition for the Yokohama International Port Terminal, one of the most significant works of architecture in recent decades, and would go on to author numerous international award-winning projects. In 2011, Moussavi founded her current London-based practice, Farshid Moussavi Architecture, recently completing the Victoria Beckham flagship store in London and the striking Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland. The office is currently engaged in a number of large projects, retail and residential projects in London and Paris. Blending research with practice, Moussavi has also taught at the Academy in Vienna, the AA, the Berlage Institute, at Columbia, Princeton, and UCLA. She is currently a columnist for the Architectural Review and professor in practice at Harvard University Graduate School of Design. Please join me in a warm welcome for Farshid Moussavi.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be here and for all of you to be here tonight. Let me get my... Can we start with my first slide, please? Thank you. Okay. It wasn't supposed to make it work. Okay. So let me begin by responding to the title of the series. Seriously cute is a type of affection, a sensation, feeling, or thought some of us may develop towards the affect cuteness, transmitted by a person, a thing, or image such as this emoji. But how many millions of occasions are there when this develops into other feelings, such as these or this? Which is because the reception of cuteness depends not only on the characteristics of the image, but also on each person's own subjectivity, as well as the context in which it is experienced. My first two books investigated how affect or different affects can be generated by architects through the assembly of building envelopes or structural systems. The Function of Style, which has followed them, encapsulates the investigation into how affect is generated, but extensive to ask why certain affects are created as opposed to others. And by function, I mean agency, not utility. So when considering the function of style, we are asking what is the agency of style of buildings as objects that transmit certain affects in everyday life. The agency of human objects in everyday experience has been discussed in the field of phenomenology in terms of how humans gain access to the being of objects. This being is assumed as either already existing, such as matter, or being governed by natural laws, or having a metaphysical reality, such as God, and so forth. Although more recent investigations into everyday experience, for example by speculative realism, question the privileging of the human being over other entities, and propose the flattening of human subjects and objects, they still investigate objects as given, whether natural or artificial. In architecture, the object-subject relationship is unavoidable, as buildings are part of everyday experience. But buildings don't exist as ready-made objects. They are arranged through the architectural process. And because style relates to the way we arrange buildings, it remains central to the discussion of agency of buildings in everyday experience. Traditionally, style has been the word used to describe a narrative around which architects unite buildings. However, three pivotal changes in the way buildings are designed and experienced since the 1990s force us to define it differently. Firstly, unity seems not to apply to contemporary architecture, which is characterized by immense diversity. If this diversity is not the product of mere eclecticism or the market, style must create an account for the coherence that underlies it. Buildings today face many challenges that are distinct, separate, and irreconcilable. They have led to different coefficients for buildings, such as space planning, security, rights of light, fire engineering, sustainability engineering, facade engineering, or health and safety, that are often beyond the expertise of the architect, requiring specialist consultants. The design process has therefore changed from a solo activity into more of a team sport, in which the different coefficients are the product of separate and concurrent lines of development that unfold at different speeds during the design process and introduce much unpredictability to it. Different building elements, no matter how large or small, are consequently vital forces for the project, some crossing paths with one another and others not. Therefore, style needs to account not for how buildings are unified, but how they can be coherent and yet be composed of different elements or diverse elements that are imbricated with one another to simultaneously address different concerns. Secondly, with the advent of the internet, the way architectural ideas are made is different, since ideas are now shared and circulated worldwide with astonishing speed. And architects are so steeped in each other's ideas and theoretical anxieties that the certainty of what belongs to one person and what to another disintegrates. And thirdly, again, because of the internet, the way buildings are experienced has changed, since many everyday activities and events that used to happen in buildings, such as shopping, reading a book, or watching a match, are now easily accessed online. But since these online activities are all reduced to the uniform context of the screen, independent of time and space, their experience has become very similar, whether reading different books, or buying an item of clothing, or watching a sports match. To complement the uniformity and the ubiquity of engaging with everyday activities online, buildings must exploit their unique spatio-temporal natures to generate the possibility for diverse types of encounters between people and activities which buildings house. For example, libraries in the wake of e-books have changed from being inward-looking book repositories solely for quietly taking out and consuming books, to open and differentiated spaces that encourage people to construct different reading and learning habits. While schools, responding to the fact that information can be searched and accessed online, have shifted from generic tutor-focused classrooms that favor the transmission and reception of standard knowledge to unique differentiated configurations that promote different kinds of experience-based learning. And department stores, responding to the rise of e-tailing, have shifted from hermetic environments whose sole objective is the provision of goods to acting as places in which the physical experience of shopping is site-specific, so that buying an item in one store is unlike buying it in any other. While offices, rather than declining in the face of email and conference calling, have changed from one-size-fits-all tailorist arrangements to include different types of interstitial spaces that promote knowledge construction through chance encounters and serendipitous knowledge exchange. Therefore, the agency of buildings, or their ability to act, resides in how their actual presence informs people's experience of their everyday activities and therefore makes a creative contribution to everyday life. To think of style in relation to people's everyday life encounters with a building rather than their understanding of the narrative underlying it is to deviate it from the traditional use of style to unite buildings to represent the personality of its architect or author, its geographical location, or the time it belongs to. For various reasons, these uses of style are now redundant. For a start, should style strive for unity? No. Unity, whether applied across a group of buildings or as a kind of organicism across all elements or parts of a single building, implies that the actual presence of a building or individual parts of them plays no unique part in people's everyday life experience, but rather provides them with the same experience as all other buildings or all parts of the buildings. Should style represent authorship? No. Today architectural ideas exist as an open source. The overzealous protection of an architect's ideas as signature or autonomous domain inhibits the migration and circulation of ideas and the consequent development of new ones. Rethinking what is now labeled as copying or imitation, as sharing from a common pool, as is often done in the field of music or has been explored by the function groups, will allow us to detach style from being fixed to an author and treat it like an open source or a rhythm, which has no beginning or end. It is always in the middle, constantly evolving in different directions by different architects. Should style represent nationality? No, because in today's world of extensive free trade, increased mobility of capital, the rise of transnational corporations, and the increased mobility of technologies, materials, and designers, strict boundaries between nations have been eroded, like the style of the modern bicycle that has evolved in the hands of different nations ever since its inception. We need to define or approach style of buildings through the idea of singularity, that any style can be adopted by any nation and changed to generate new unpredictable styles. Should style represent a period of time? No, because time is not divided into periods in which everything is frozen or fixed. Today, as I mentioned earlier, buildings are subject to different external and often conflictual causes, which means that they evolve through separate, equal, and concurrent lines of development that unfold at different speeds throughout the design process, which may take anything from 1 to 6 years. Enhanced levels of security may require imminent changes to the entry sequence of a building early in the design process, whereas new environmental regulations may necessitate changes to the envelope midway through the process, and the election of a new mayor every 4 years could imply a change in the space program, a budgetary change, or even the building location. The organicist model, in which each element or part obediently serves the whole in a vacuum, is clearly out. Like the M16 rifle, the challenge for an architect today is to conceive of buildings not as unified wholes, but as a confederation of elements, which we can call an assemblage or manifold, with a particular kind of arrangement and grouping that introduces an effectivity proper to them without reducing the independence of the elements so that they can be changed during the design process. Having discarded the representational narratives that historically define style, what remains in people's experience of buildings is the raw presence, or thisness, which their diverse individual elements with their colors, textures, shapes, and forms together produce. Severe limitations indeed, but for the architect, they hold the secret to a new way of working, which involves assembling the larger and larger number of elements and things buildings are divided into, in new ways without the constraints of representation. Each assemblage gives a specific propensity to building elements, which manifests itself as a cluster of affects. A gate introduced within the perimeter wall of a building may transmit affects of closure and traversability. The asymmetric location of a window in a bedroom may transmit invisibility and openness. Full-height glazing of hotel rooms may transmit transparency and exposure. Handrails located around museum exhibits may transmit visibility and untouchability. Or skylights in a train station may transmit transparency as well as protection. In order to investigate buildings in relation to questions of agency, we must then ask not what its style stands for, but in what way is it active in everyday life? Here, for instance, is the Smithsonian East Wing bar IMP, where unlike on the inside of the museum, where people are discouraged from touching its precious artifacts, the exterior of the museum is designed with blade-like corners whose affective sharpness is so inviting to touch that visitors have partly worn their edges away. Similarly, at the Guggenheim Museum, the lowness of the handrail invites people to recline on it, with the result that people who might otherwise pass quickly through its ramping galleries as if they were walking along the aisles of a supermarket stop and lean on the handrails while they look at the art. While in the case of FOS Leicester Cineplex, the claustrophobic effects of reflectivity, glare, and deformation transmitted by its mirror stainless steel cladding means that rather than ignoring the Cineplex, as is often the case with such inward-looking buildings, at a couple of points around the building, passers-by stop and salute the building systematically. No matter what sex or age. There is no reason that people should respect this building. No, you've gone too far back. This was certainly not part of our brief as architects, nor was it a cultural response we hoped to evoke, rather, like the handrails which stop people falling into the Guggenheim atrium, or the walls which shield the Smithsonian galleries from the elements. The envelope of the Cineplex is a consequence of the practical demand for dark interiors, as well as the desire to generate affects that would disrupt the conventional encounter with this kind of building in the city. What is going on here can't be reduced to either the agency of the object or the passers-by subjectivities. It is produced by them together. It is caused by their encounter. The traditional representational approach to style is based on an anthropocentric conception of agency and assumes that there is a direct road from the act of looking at a building and the fact of understanding it, as well as a concordance between the sensibility of one person and another, which we know doesn't exist. Recognizing that the aesthetic experience or encounter between buildings and people is a co-production brings us closer to a non-anthropocentric conception of agency. That is, when different people with their own unique subject positions come to contact with a building, they encounter some or all of its affects, which result from how its different elements have been styled or arranged. For example, a residential building may transmit affects of flexibility, transparency, and differentiation inside, and scalelessness and privacy outside. Some people only experience the building as passers-by, and others who live in it may encounter some of its other affects. Through these encounters, people construct their own unique experience-based knowledge of the world. Therefore, we can define style in the following way. Style is the agency given to the elements of a building through their specific arrangement. It manifests itself as a cluster of affects that spreads out from the building and influences the kind of assemblage people will form with it as they take part in their everyday activities, such as residing, working, or watching movies. Consider the interior of a cinema. When a certain way of arranging one of its elements, such as its seats, is repeated over and over again, a convention emerges. The seating arrangement in cinemas then becomes a type or typical, leading to a typifying and perception in those going to watch movies. The activity of watching movies in the way this seating arrangement dictates acquires a naturalness, so that people who begin to watch movies in this way unthinkingly. Whereas if the convention of seating arrangement is different and a cinema no longer conforms to people's expectations, it becomes conspicuous. And even if it is just for a brief moment, they have to think about it and work out how to use it. In other words, the introduction of a stylistic shift away from the typical cinema creates an awareness or surprise about the cinema which people would otherwise not have noticed. When discussing subjective experience, Heidegger and Levinas refer to surprise as a rupture in the experience of objects that helps humans decipher the transcendent and beyond. However, we know that the source of change or surprise in this instance is the result of the efficacy or the creative agency of the architect. Here is the Yokohama Passenger Port Terminal, a project where we as the architects changed a number of conventions that influence how people typically engage with the ferry terminal. Instead of a conventional or dominant way of arranging the terminal around a linear circulation route to simply move passengers as directly as possible to the gates, which reduces its experience to a thoroughfare, we designed it with a looped circulation system through bifurcating terminal floors, which seamlessly connects people to levels above and below, to free them from the habit of passively passing through it. So they might choose it as a place to sit down and paint. Therefore, by disrupting the conventions associated with a building for traveling, we generated a new presence or style for a ferry terminal that frees individuals from previous experiences of such buildings, as well as any traveling preconceptions, so that they could creatively respond to it. The philosopher Jacques Rancière argues that the significance of aesthetics lies in the fact that what can be apprehended by the senses determines possibilities for the participation of individuals in daily life. For Rancière, politics is a disruption of the senses in conventionally perceived spaces to make that which did not possess grounds to be seen, so that active encounters replace passive participation. We could then say that by making conventions of how everyday activities are arranged unfamiliar, architects disrupt or resist the way bodies of individuals are supposed to fit those everyday activities, and in doing so, ground style in the micropolitics of everyday life. The efficacy of the architect is not about telling people the right way to use a terminal, or watch movies, or to live in houses, or to work in offices. It doesn't have definitive outcomes. It resides in creating a disruption or dissensus in how buildings are conventionally perceived and used to generate the kind of differences in buildings that call for a response or active participation from the people who use, contradicting the idea that only human subjects have agency. To adopt this potential of buildings, it is necessary to address style not as a representation but as a performance. So what is the effect of this approach on the process of design? This is a residential complex we are designing for the city of Montpellier in the south of France, where we have based its style or arrangement of the building elements on how it would influence people's experience of residing in such a building. The core, through its layout and location, is the agent, determining the privacy or intrusion people experience on their way to their apartment. The floor plates, owing to their size, are the agent determining the size and number of units on any one floor, and the number of orientations afforded by each, and therefore whether residents experience natural ventilation or stuffiness. The location of the service risers, core and structure, is the agent, determining the level of flexibility and inflexibility the residents experience over time as the need to reconfigure their apartments arises. And the relationship between the floor plate, the envelope, and the handrail is the agent, determining the privacy or exposure residents experience in their balconies. So you can see that the building can neither be governed by a single unifying idea, as in an organic whole, nor can it be reduced to independent elements. They must be arranged as an assemblage, so that each one, by virtue of its location and grouping with other elements, develops an emergent property, whose effectivity is the possibility it provides for people to reside in the building in a new way. The structure, core, and services form one group of elements. The floor plates and envelope forms another group of elements. And the floor plates and handrail forms another group. And here is how the group performs. The core and service rises are centrally located and coupled with structural walls along the perimeter envelope. This generates an interior that transmits flexibility and is liberated of any fixed elements. The external envelope is inset to generate balconies, and the remainder of the floor plate, owing to its small size, is subdivided into only 4 corner units which benefit from cross-ventilation. Since these outdoor spaces would abut each other, it would be usual for dividing screens to be introduced, or since dividing screens limit views laterally, their shape might be changed from straight to curved, as in the Marina Towers and the Aqua Towers, which rectifies the problem of blocked views. But since the outdoor spaces overlook each other laterally, whether they are wrapped around the circular plan or aligned linearly, could we go one forward, please? They compromise privacy sideways, as well as from above, since the balconies are stacked on top of one another. A discordance can also exist between the interior layout and the balcony, either because the balconies are identical in size despite the differently sized apartments, or because the balcony is curved whereas the interior is rectilinear. Given the increasing invasion of privacy we experience in our contemporary life, we chose to focus our agency on shifting this convention of outdoor spaces which provide a lack of privacy. First, the typical floor plate is pinched to divide the balconies of the 4 units, obviating the need for a dividing screen. Then the floor plate and the perimeter envelope are made curvilinear, so the balconies would flow more easily around the corner. The floor plate is then rotated relative to the envelope until it is no longer possible to oversee or overlook the neighboring balcony, as seen in this image. In order to reduce the overlooking of balconies vertically, the position of balconies are shifted from one floor to another. This generates floor plates that are not identical to each other and transmit affects of privacy, diversity, and multidirectionality. It also doubles the vertical distance between the balconies, so that overlooking that conventionally occurs when balconies are stacked on top of each other is minimized, as the balcony below is always 2 floors down. To minimize views down even further, the handrail is mobilized as an agent, so that the balconies down are less visible. A condition that is found along the red lines on these plans. So handrails of some balconies must generate a gradient of privacy along their length. In a residential building, the handrail must typically perform 2 contradictory roles to allow maximum views out of each balcony and minimum views in from the exterior. In our case, the third one of minimizing views down. The profile chosen for the handrail support and its distribution can play a significant role in performing these roles, as indicated by these 4 types of handrail supports and the different percentages of views in and out that they enable. Views in and out do not vary so much when the handrail comprises one line of supports with rectangular profiles, or 2 lines of support with circular profiles. But when the 2 lines of support are offset, views in are reduced while maintaining the transparency out. And if the spacing of the support is densified, as seen to the right, the handrail minimizes overlooking in views down. This assemblage of floor plates, envelope, and handrails generates 2 types of private balconies. A single height balcony with an exterior curtain for additional privacy, and a double height balcony, which is found in different orientations along the height of the building due to the rotation of the balconies, therefore providing many options of outdoor spaces based on size, shape, type of view, and sun exposure. Therefore, approaching the building as an assemblage provides its style with different agencies. The agency to shift people's experience of their interior from interior-exterior discordance and stuffiness to interior-exterior concordance and cross-ventilation, and the agency to shift the experience of balconies from exposure and homogeneity to extreme privacy and diversity. The building isn't finished, so it is impossible to know what impact these affects will have on the people who will live in the apartment. But it is inevitable that the encounter between people and a new kind of balcony in an apartment, an open, extremely private space, will prompt creative responses from residents, since there is no precedent for this kind of outdoor space. The style of museums too can call for active participation from the people who use them. Whereas the primary concern for terminals is getting people from A to B as quickly as possible, the primary practical concern for contemporary art museums is the flexibility of the galleries to display changing exhibitions. Could we go next, please? The white cube type of gallery, because of its total whiteness and separation from the rest of the museum as well as the exterior, is typically considered the most flexible for changing exhibitions. However, by being self-contained and freed from time and daily life, it transmits neutrality, atemporality, and acontextuality. And as the museum exterior is disconnected from the exterior experience of the galleries, it prompts critics to argue for the style of the museum through external narratives such as sales and spinnakers, rather than an agency it might otherwise carry vis-a-vis going to see art. Meanwhile, the rest of the museum, given that the galleries are sealed away, is devoid of any art. We designed the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland to subvert the convention of the museum as a decorated shed that represents external narratives outside and provides a neutral white cube inside. However, this is not done by designing the museum as an organic whole either. but as an assemblage of elements that in groups act in different ways as agents in people's experience of viewing art and the museum. The envelope and the mainstay are the primary agents, but these in themselves are made out of smaller elements or smaller agencies, as Darwin would say. The small elements of the envelope include its shape, its entrances, its rain screen cladding, its fireproof paint and structure, and its windows. Its shape generated through a compact hexagonal entry floor, rising to a rectangular roof, allowed us to locate the building in the corner of the site, leaving space for a plaza in front, into which museum events would spill out in good weather. This shape, which is the second best fit for the corner after a circle, also provides 5 entrances on different sides of the building. So it can be subdivided into distinct areas that can be accessed separately. Therefore, all of the interior, and not just the main gallery, is embedded with hyperflexibility to be reconfigured over time and accessed in many ways. At times, it can be used for events, and at other times, for multiple simultaneous exhibitions, such as a space on the entry floor, with an entrance to the museum outside that is assembled with movable shelving, so during the day it hosts the museum store. Could we go very fast through this, please? And at night, it converts to a performance art space. The envelope's shape is also designed to act together with its construction layers to generate unexpected experiences. Its exterior vented rain screen layer is assembled with black mirror stainless steel strips pressed in the middle, which creates an oil can effect within it and arranged diagonally across the building's faces. This provides it with a specific phenomenal quality to be simultaneously reflective and absorptive. Therefore, rather than being timeless and separated from daily life, it catches the light and reflections of the physical context of the museum, as well as changing human relations, and generates different unexpected effects. Close up, the cladding strips transmit delay, refraction, compression, refiguration, displacement, light, and transience. Further away, I went too fast, yes. Further away, the rain screen in combination with the envelope shape transmit other effects depending on the point of view which it is viewed from. From certain points, solidity and blackness, and from other points, hollowness, tinting, and ambiguity. I've been told that it was designed to look like a crystal, where this agency lies not in representing any external narrative, but in appearing relational or dialogic, rather than detached from its context. Inside, the structural steel decking is another small element of the envelope whose agency has been activated. It is painted in blue fire-resistant paint. Instead of a narrative, the tension between the affect blue on the inside and black on the outside produces the sense of, or the way of, or the way of entering the museum, which is not like moving between two disconnected states, because since the black rain screen and the blue structural metal decking follow the same shape, the building retains a sense of surface tension between the inside and the outside of the museum, which visitors experience upon entering. The blue fireproof paint performs other functions too. It wraps around all of the museum spaces, reinforcing continuity between art and non-art spaces. When it wraps around the main gallery, it subverts the neutrality of the white cube gallery where art floats and has no ties. The arrangement of the temporary walls reveal the perimeter blue walls, and natural light flows in. Here space becomes more active, engaging with the art. Finally, Mocha's windows form another small element or agent of his envelope assemblage. They are arranged as long strips, irrespective of the location of the floors inside, and diagonally orientated, following the orientation of the exterior rain screen cladding. In combination with the envelope shape, they transmit an effect of movement and scalelessness. On the inside, the windows are mobilized to disrupt the assumed incommensurability of the white cube gallery interior and exterior, typically celebrated by carefully framed windows. The window reveals are clad in mirror stainless steel to displace the depth of the gallery wall with lateral views of the exterior. This generates new landscapes throughout the day, revealing new relationships. What if a new Frank Gehry building is built facing Mocha? It would be better than the existing car park. What if pedestrian crossings are planned to cross diagonally at the junctions of Mayfield and Euclid? They do this in Tokyo, and it avoids watching or waiting twice behind slow lights to cross a junction. The mirror reveals are therefore an act in which the inside and the outside, rather than being presented as separate to gallery visitors, are intertwined, generating an affect of temporality. The stair is another agent in changing the conventional museum experience. It is designed to provide access, but also to subvert the typical separation between art and non-art spaces, as well as the linearity of typical museum stairs. What appears as a single staircase is in fact a double-decker stair, an open stair stacked on top of one of the egress stairs to save space, but also to provide not just one route to climb the museum floor, but 10 open and closed routes, which is intertwined with art. The enclosed egress route is also designed as a sound gallery, subverting the idea that an egress stair is only used in case of emergencies. It is painted yellow to dematerialize the sense of space and generate affects of weightlessness, scalelessness, in order to focus attention on sound. While the upper route is designed with wide landings to act both as a social space as well as a performance space. The stair is extended. We can go over it. The stair is extended over the top gallery to enable visitors to look inside. If we could, yeah. When it is closed for the setting of exhibitions, thus expanding their perception of the museum as a space of display to include the production of exhibitions too. I think we can conclude that the specific arrangements of Mocha's elements, with stair and envelopes entrances, rain screen cladding, and interior fireproofing define its style, trajectory, or elan as a museum, a contemporary art museum that transmits flexibility, temporality, transience, boundlessness, scalelessness, relationality, and dialogism. Next, let's briefly discuss a smaller project, the Victoria Beckham flagship store in London, where we were asked to design the store on 3 floors of an existing building. Like most brands, Victoria Beckham has an online shopping platform, so this project raised the following question for us. How can the style or arrangement of its shopfront, ceilings, floors, stairs, and display systems generate a site-specific shopping experience? Or how can the elements of a store generate a variety of experiential moments that invite different types of interaction in time and space, like different propositions? To shift the exterior presence of the store away from the conventional shopfront, which is treated as a display space separate from the interior, the Victoria Beckham shopfront is designed as a window, partially in glass and partially as a concrete sash window with no merchandise on display, so that it would function with the space inside and activate the space of the sense of the store from the exterior, less like a market and more like a gallery. When customers approach the concrete window, they are presented with the surprise. Could we go next, please? That what appeared as a sash window that usually slides vertically up and down is a sliding door that effortlessly slides to one side. Inside, to shift the experience of the store away from transmitting choice, as in a market, as well as permanence and predictability over time. Its display systems and architectural surfaces are designed to present change and surprise. The accessory wall for handbags immediately behind the shopfront is designed as a long, retractable set of shelves to allow the store to vary the amount of shelves and handbags on display, or to completely remove them to allow the space to be used for events. The ceiling is clad in mirror stainless steel, so it would draw customers to view the top of handbags that are reflected in it, which are often the most interesting. Next. And to create a virtual, a virtual double of the space. People are engaged in a process of working out where exactly is the actual ceiling line, or how tall is this space in actuality. 2 staircases connect the entry level to floors above and below. Their opening is arranged smaller than the stairs, generating a partial ceiling for them that shows everything upside down and provides uneven headroom. This alters people's perception of the staircase as merely practical. The stair is a room of its own, in which accessories, clothing, and different artworks are displayed over time. Meanwhile, in order to engage customers in a sense of upward expansion and disrupt the sense of permanence that is conventionally transmitted by stores' display systems, the ceiling of the floor above is designed as a lightweight concrete covered ceiling. This use of covered ceiling is incidentally has a history in the modern art gallery, concealing the mechanical and electrical systems. But here it is used to support a movable system of chains for hanging clothing too, subverting the usual fixed clothing displays. Clothing can be moved to different locations like movable walls in a gallery, or entirely removed to convert the store into an event space. The alliance made between the hanging system and the ceiling has other implications in the shopping experience. Typically, customers need to put their handbags down, to pull the hanger off the rail, and use both hands to view a piece of clothing front and back, or to hold it and pull the price tag out with the other. It soon becomes a very awkward situation. The chain system allows customers, could we try this as a video, to pull out the chain and rotate the clothing 360 degrees with one hand, which while they continue to carry their handbags with the other. So it injects a sense of playfulness in the shopping experience, challenging the convention that the shop is simply a market of choice. To further make the perception and experience of shopping site-specific, the counters for folded clothing and small accessories are designed in mirrored stainless steel to turn them away from floating objects to objects that are immersed in their environment. Consequently, the experience of shopping for knitwear as well as small accessories is inseparable from the space that surrounds them. And to further liberate the customer's experience from predictability, the seating of the store is designed as a system of triangular benches that can be combined in different ways and be moved around the store so that they will be encountered in different ways over different visits to the store. So when you come into the store, something that you may have taken for granted, the usual displays with the sole objective of provision of goods, starts to lose its ground. You have to find out what the shop is and how you behave in it. Just to finish, this is an office building we're working on, 130 Fenchurch Street, a 17-story mid-rise building located within the eastern cluster of tall buildings in the City of London, an area which fosters urban synergy or knowledge spillovers between financial trading firms formally and informally. This means that the public realm between buildings is in intense use as traders move between headquarters. The project therefore raised two questions for us. How should the building articulate its presence as an object of encounter for passers-by for whom the practical functions of the interior is not of concern? And given that work is increasingly defined by digital technology, how can the physical space of work make a contribution to it? To address these two questions, we had to identify the elements that relate to each one of them and the coefficients that they individually or together produce. The massing and the curtain wall of an office building are the agents determining its exterior presence by day. For example, the massing could imply that rays of sun are directed towards people's cars on the left, as in the case of the so-called walkie-talkie at 120 Fenchurch Street in London. Or the massing could benefit the rights of light of neighboring streets or buildings, as in the case of the Cheese Grater building to the right at 122 Leadenhall Street. By night, the exterior presence of an office building is defined by its structure and ceilings that become visible. Here are office buildings nearby our site, which during the day are designed to be distinct from one another, but at night it is hard to tell one from the other as they all use the same ceiling system. The interior presence of workspaces is defined through the relationship between core, structure, curtain wall, its shading devices and services. The relationship between the core and the structure relates to the flexibility of its occupancy pattern. The combination of the central core and exoskeletal structure of 30 St. Mary's Axe, which is at the top, provides less flexibility than the combination of the external core and exoskeletal structure of 122 Leadenhall at the bottom. And the relationship between the structure and the curtain wall relates to the transparency of workspaces and the flexibility of office planning. Just like a residential project, the building can neither be governed by a single predetermined idea as in an organic whole, nor can it be reduced to independent or discrete elements. It must be conceived as an assemblage in which elements, by virtue of its location and grouping, can develop different emergent properties. The other advantage of this approach is that certain elements can continue to develop over time, over a longer period as needed. For example, the core of our building is still being reappraised and developed. We began by addressing the presence of the building in the city, since this is first needed in order to obtain planning approval from the City of London Corporation. Most mid-rise buildings in the area have a stepped massing to disguise their scale from the street level. But there is no need to disguise the mass of the building on Fenchurch Street. Since Fenchurch Street is continuously bending and narrows, the building mass would always only be seen partially along the approaching streets anyway. Since stepping would have almost no effect on passers-by, our massing strategy is based on pure extrusion. And therefore, the elements that will have agency in shaping people's encounter with the building will be its curtain wall. Conventionally, curtain walls are assembled independent of the load-bearing structure in order to appear transparent. Yet they are never fully transparent, except perhaps at night, because the curtain wall includes horizontals and vertical caps or modular silicone joints and expansion joints, as well as different shading devices, which appear darker than glass. Consequently, a grid appears that transmits affects of efficiency, which perhaps belongs more to the tailor's days than today's workplace. During the day, the curtain wall is reflective, which is meant to integrate the presence of the building into its context by mirroring it, but instead generates a sense of anonymity and disappearance in the building. We wanted to shift the presence of 130 Fenchurch Street away from these conventions of transmitting efficiency, anonymity, and disappearance, which are not desirable perhaps any longer. Therefore, firstly, rather than by assembling the curtain wall with flat pieces of glass, it is assembled with concave ones, which are varied in scale to accommodate the irregularities of the site footprint and generate variety in people's experience as they move around the building. Secondly, the curved glass panels are assembled with a structurally glazed reveal, replacing the conventional appearance of frames with a shadow reveal. Instead of simply mirroring its context, the fluted curtain wall will compress reflections of the context into each one of its segments, and new images will emerge. Thirdly, in order to simplify the color and tonal range of the reflections into a subtle gradation of tones, the glass will be freed to appear black, similar to black glass used by painters in the 18th and the 19th century to turn from geometric to physiological optics. The black frit will not only reduce the tonalities of reflections and reflective qualities of glass, it will also absorb the dark shadow reveal between the glass panels and turn the images, repeated images, into a continuity. The tighter the fluting, the finer will be the grain of the image. The variations of the curtain wall, as well as the simplicity of its extruded shape, will be at odds with the neighbors, with its step neighbors or sculptural nearby high-rises, and will engage passers-by to explore all of its edges or sides as they move past the building. Whilst it's serrated, rooftop will reinforce the building's presence and distinction against the sky. Here their focus will be lifted upwards, unlike a conventional flat curtain wall, which almost disappears against the sky. The cluster affects of presence and multiplicity, verticality and fluting, serration and fluidity are very different to affects of rigidity, stepping, stacking, flatness, absence, and uniformity experienced in buildings nearby. This affective break will surprise people and invite them to make sense of the building. On the interior, the curtain wall of a mid-rise building, as seen in these images, remains present, but its agency resides in the type of alliance it forms with the building structure to define greater or lesser flexibility for the workspaces. The structural frame of a mid-rise tower is conventionally designed at 9 meter spacing. At this span, the columns are very large, which is a challenge for office partitioning. Instead, we have designed the structural columns at 3 meter spacing so that they would appear as part of the curtain wall. At this span, the columns are substantially smaller and fit within the depths of the curvature of the curtain wall. This frees up area otherwise taken up by structure and optimizes the interior for partitions if required. In addition, the 3-meter spacing of columns will perform like interior bristolet along the west facades by stopping the afternoon suns from coming in at low level and therefore avoiding glare in the work spaces. On the south facade at midday, the sun will be shining directly into the spaces. In this case, it will be the frit acting to filter the light, mitigating glare. The alliance between the structure and the curtain wall, however, have emergent aesthetic implications too. Inside, the conventional 9-meter spacing of columns places the emphasis on structure, whereas the even distribution of columns at 3-meter spacing places the emphasis on space. And outside, instead of the large columns at 9-meter centers and the floor slabs, the presence of the smaller vertical columns at 3-meter spacing dissolves behind the recessed modules. Along street views, the depth of the columns will partially interrupt views in the center of each glass panel, marked in red, is where there will be clear views out into the interiors. With this in mind, the black frit is graduated from densest at both edges that sit in front of the structure to total transparency in the central area of each glass module. Here we see half of one of the glass modules. For the interior views out, the black color of the frit has the advantage that physiologically the human eye is trained to focus on lighter colors, and therefore the eye will see straight through when viewing to the outside. On the exterior, the dense frit along the edges of each glass panel will absorb both the shadow, structural reveal, as well as the presence of the columns on oblique views, and it will also generate dark vertical shadows in each one of the glass flutes, transmitting verticality. In contrast to the dark vertical shadow, the presence of the floor spandrels recede and the tower will transmit scalelessness. By day, the space between the passers-by and the curtain wall will therefore be constantly active. The eye will become aware of a seemingly tireless movement within the apparent simplicity of the curtain wall, and from this a sensory paradox will begin to emerge. The passers-by will be drawn to search across the surface of the curtain wall for the source of its dramatic, vertiginous effect, only to discover that there is nowhere for it to rest on. And it is in this act of assembling elements in a coherent way, so that they would co-function to generate emergent effects without any attempt at communicating their practical functions, that the style of the curtain wall will be free of all representational as well as practical functions of the offices, to instead engage their actual process of perception. At night, as I mentioned earlier, the exterior presence of the building is defined by its structure and the ceilings that become visible. The fluted glass panels will appear transparent, and the perimeter columns will carry less visual weight by virtue of their slenderness and dark colors. It is therefore the interplay between the ceilings and the floor spandrels which will have agency in people's perception. Focusing on the effectivity produced between the ceiling and the curtain wall at night, instead of using the typical ceiling tiles, we are developing a linear baffle system which will easily address the coefficient of lighting and accessibility to the services integrated in the ceiling, whilst also providing texture to the ceiling. Instead of an even distribution of baffles, we are at present exploring an uneven spacing between them as a way to create an illusion of pleating to the ceiling at the scale of the column grid. The ceiling will then transmit rhythm and movement rather than flatness. From the exterior looking up at the ceiling at night, the conjunction of the horizontals of the floor slabs and the diagonals of the ceiling will produce an entirely new form that disrupts the anonymity and disappearance transmitted by the ceilings of the neighboring office buildings. This could not be predetermined. We had to find it during the process. As I mentioned, the project is ongoing, but I think it already shows that what might seem a limited beginning, a curved glazing profile, can become a fertile ground for many affects, because it is neutral and you can work into it and work into it and work into it, to group it simultaneously with different elements. Accordingly, each element of the building is simultaneously one thing and several things. It is neither subservient to a single fundamental idea, nor can it be seen by itself. It is always affected by other elements. And the agency or freedom of the architect consists in moving about within the narrow frame to find opportunities for shifting conventions no matter how large or small. This example of how we mobilize the different elements in an office building to create shifts in the traditional encounter people form with such buildings is an example of how style can be given agency vis-a-vis everyday life. So having defined style and its agency in the context of contemporary practice, let's discuss what is the consequence of it when it is adopted by all architects. In other words, when it becomes a shared approach. The style book brings together projects from the 1990s to the present and some from early in the 20th century that have a singular style, to investigate their style as a shared rather than individualistic concern. They are drawn in a similar manner to identify the similarities and highlight their differences. They are also grouped according to the activities they host as a way to explicate a link between the differences between their style and everyday life. For example, buildings for research, reading and research that are grouped together, presenting similar but different central atriums. Buildings for shopping, grouped together that present extruded or non-extruded sales floors. Buildings for viewing exhibitions that present one or two-way enfilade of galleries. Or building for traveling by aeroplane with similar or different radial concourses. Where the differences are located, and when they are located, it is possible to see where the moments of dissensus are located and where architects have chosen to exercise their agencies. We saw earlier comparisons of curved balconies, next please, in the Marina Towers and the Aqua Tower, as well as the famous Montpellier residential complex, and how the style of the Montpellier complex generates extreme privacy for outdoor spaces in a residential building. The book is in the full description of all the ways that each one of these projects have agencies in the way I could delve into with FMA projects, but particular parts of each one of these projects and how those are creating shifts or disruptions in conventions made by another project. For example, Mies van der Rohe's Weisenhof Siedlung building to the left and Effoy's Carabanchel building to the right are similar. They are similar because they are both residential slab buildings that increase the number of cores that you would normally find in a slab building, eliminating the need for a long internal corridor and making it possible to assemble the apartments as double aspect units that run through the slab, an arrangement that generates an effect of airiness and brightness as well as privacy inside. However, in Carabanchel, balconies, as you see to the right, are arranged so that they run along the entire length of each apartment at both ends. Unlike the small projecting balconies of the Weisenhof Siedlung complex to the left, and all windows of the Carabanchel building are floor to ceiling, generating an effect of interior-exterior continuity, unlike the Weisenhof Siedlung, where only at the point where you have a balcony, the windows are full height. Moreover, the Carabanchel balconies are supplemented with floor-to-ceiling bamboo shutters for privacy, which as inhabitants open and close them during the day, generates an effect of variety to the building, unlike the building on the left, which remains uniform throughout the day. The effects of uniformity, interiority, and exposure that were generated in the Weisenhof Siedlung complex are therefore subverted by the style of the Carabanchel complex. The Johnson Wax could be good. The Johnson Wax headquarters and the Shanghai Tower are also similar buildings in the way they introduce peripheral atriums in an office tower. In the Johnson Wax building, on the left, a circular floor plate is placed on top of a rectangular floor plate with rounded corners to generate an atrium that transmits a sense of visual connection between the two floors. This arrangement is repeated throughout the entire tower, generating identical corner atriums. To the right, the Shanghai Tower, the idea of peripheral atrium is repeated, or you could say appropriated, by stacking 12 to 15 floor plates 9 times along the height of the building. The top and bottom floors are being triangular in shape with rounded corners, and the intermediate floors being circular. But here the atrium is different to that of the Johnson Wax, not only in scale and shape, but also, as you see in the image, through the use of an inner glass layer to separate the workspaces from the atrium, providing them with acoustic privacy and insulation while keeping them visually connected to the atrium. which as a separate entity can act as a breakout space for the workers. The atrium in the Shanghai Tower therefore transmits effects of triangularity, transparency, and interaction, which are different from tubularity, translucency, and introversion of the Johnson Wax Tower. 30 St. Mary's Axe and the Tezomok office tower also embrace the idea of peripheral atriums, but instead of stacking small side atriums, they are arranged as a single continuous peripheral atriums along the entire section of the offices, and in doing so steer, we could argue, politics of the workplace away from cellularization and extrusion and standardization in favor of transparency, communication, and complexification. Other projects compared in the style book share this process of appropriation and dissensus as a way to use style as an agent of change. For example, the residential building to the right, through changing the grouping, size, and shape of elements that define the border of apartments, and the corridor in the building to the left shifts people's experience of entering apartments from enclosure and interiority to exposure and exteriority. Here are two buildings for learning. The building to the left is arranged with a perimeter load-bearing structural concrete wall to provide flexibility within the learning spaces. Its structural perimeter wall is evenly pierced with narrow windows to insulate the learning spaces visually and acoustically, and so it transmits effects of homogeneity and introversion as well. The building to the right appropriates the idea of the perimeter structural wall, but to overcome introversion and homogeneity, it pierces the wall with varying sized windows, which results in differentiation and porosity in the learning spaces. Here are two buildings for viewing exhibitions, which introduce different different ways of bringing natural light, diffused natural light into the galleries, and alter in different ways the conventions associated with viewing art. The larger consequence of this approach to style, as I hope the slides show, is not incoherent diversity, but the diversity underlying which is a network of projects which are related to one another but discontinuous with each other at the same time. Each project appropriates conventions by another project, which is inevitable today, and shifts it to make something new appear in the encounter between people and their everyday activities, in which they're able to discard habits of use that have come to seem inevitable. Accordingly, each building, we could say, is caught in a distinct historical web, and the agency of its style does not reside in its formal originality, but in the way it appropriates and reconfigures the conventions relating with forms to a certain everyday activity. By providing alternatives, could we go next, please, to existing conventions, architects abandon the pursuit of autonomous perfection or the ambition of the modernist avant-garde to make buildings function through some kind of conformity to a plan, or proposing solutions at the grand or macro scale, such as unity or 5 points of architecture. Instead, they engage the micropolitics of everyday life through the process of differentiation. Consciously or unconsciously, I believe this has been the shared style to approach since the 1990s. And as a result, the contemporary field of architecture has become an intricate network of styles developing like a rhythm, not from a single origin or towards a single end, but growing from the middle, from different strands of thoughts that have come to existence since the early 20th century. This was the end of my slide. I have a set of slides that will run. We will leave to run while I hope you have questions that I can respond. Thank you.
We can take a few questions. Sarah?
Mr. Farshid, I very much enjoyed the intelligence of your very careful looking at architecture combined with this broader issue of style. I wondered about your insistence on dissonance or estrangement in terms of that relational understanding between the subject and the object, and how it differs from early 20th century notions of estrangement. So the importance of the disruption or the subversion, and how you see it as similar to or different from earlier notions of estrangement in modernism.
Estrangement in modernism, it was, am I correct to say that it was probably something that was pursued more in arts rather than architecture?
Constructivism would have had sort of, or even if you
I located constructivism finally in a kind of in a representational camp, trying to represent technology progress through the aesthetic of perhaps machine. But I think, generally speaking, I think that the idea of estrangement is I think it's more to, it's not to completely displace people entirely. I don't know, maybe it's the scale of displacement that is different. Maybe.
That's probably right. Yeah.
Maybe it's the scale of displacement that is different. Perhaps because it is more, but maybe not. Maybe not. I'm not sure. I have to think about it.
Someone else?
Ms. Moussavi, how do you convince your clients in going to the estrangement, as we see more and more, even internationally, most architects are gravitating to uniformity in buildings?
Well, I am both fortunate and unfortunate that the only clients that come to me want innovation. So I don't see those kinds of clients, which means I don't have as much work as I should have. I don't know. It is true. I think it is true that I only see clients who are not afraid of seeing things that are perhaps a bit strange, and are probably looking for them. That's that. So that would be my direct response to you. How do I convince my clients? I think that I see clients who want to use architecture as a way to create change, in also in their business and in their fields, because obviously very few clients who come to an architect just for the sake of architecture. Architecture is a means to other things. So I think that's the case. There are clearly clients that would probably want something a little bit more conventional, but would any client, well, few clients would admit that. I think it's always been the task of the architect to try to argue for the benefits of doing something differently. And I don't think we have a bigger challenge now than when Mies was doing this building. You know, I think this is one of the things that we need to put on the table of why what we are putting forward adds value and why it should, why it's significant. I think that's one of the jobs that we have. It's not easy, but it's also not impossible.
Scott?
So, Mies did the Friedrichstrasse skyscraper, and it was kind of a defamiliarization of the stone city as it stood at that point. Perhaps very similar to the Fenchurch Street project. And one would suggest that Mies, none of Mies's buildings are the same. I mean, it's all in the eye of the beholder, one might suggest. You know, the Seagram building is not the same as Lakeshore Drive. Subtly, one might say. And that maybe perhaps it only becomes a style when someone takes it up, or when more than one person takes it up, a number of people take it up, and it becomes a kind of common language. And so I'm just wondering to the extent to which what is the consistency, say, in one of your projects that you would be able to, say, nominate positively as the thing that could be taken up? Or do you think that they resist the kind of codification?
No, I'm encouraging appropriation. Otherwise I wouldn't put together the style book. So I think the minute we make a project, it's an idea that exists and anyone should be able to take it, but obviously take it and do something to it. So, and also let's not pretend that we work in a vacuum and that we are the only ones trying to do certain things. So, for example, when we were working on the Montpellier project, honestly, we were not thinking of its affinity with the Aqua Tower. I mean, it seems like so obvious now, but we were not thinking of it. And when we were working on the Caravanchel housing project, I promise you, we never had the Weisenhof building of Mies in our head. However, now that it's there, it's impossible for me not to make the comparison and to situate the project in relation to it. And I think that maybe in those cases they were unconscious, but now that I'm aware of let's say, the potential of this way of also working, I'm interested to look for them. And I've also become aware, more and more aware, that actually, instead of complaining that, everything is similar because, well, we are immersed in information flow, perhaps what we should do is to look for the differences and ask what the differences are directed at. And then there is no problem of sharing information. We're actually building on each other's knowledge, whether it's the immediate present or the a little bit more distant present, past. You can appropriate ideas, and I think architecture has always done. I mean, if we don't acknowledge that, it means we don't acknowledge that there is a discipline to architecture. So, in some ways, what I'm saying is nothing new. Is nothing new, but I think there is a relevance to saying it now. For example, with the question of perhaps estrangement, there is a relevance to it now, which is we are immersed in a sea of projects that their tendency is similarity. Perhaps the similarities come because we share ideas and we watch the same sites on the internet. Perhaps it's because we travel more. Perhaps because clients are forcing us to do the same thing. So what do we have to do? We have to look for differences. We have to push for differences. And I think that has a lot of relevance now in the context that we practice today.
Okay. Take one.
Yes, sure.
Sorry.
The three books that you've done, ornament, structure, and now style. Style is kind of performance and program. Are we to see those as a linear, one replacing the other, or do you kind of see those as each having equal use at this point?
I think they have their own use in the sense that each one of the books is trying to take an architectural, let's say, concept that we've held throughout history, but it has been defined and redefined to become relevant to its moment. And, well, the books put forward a new way of formulating them to make them productive again. But that's one conversation. But the books are also, I hope, useful references for looking at how envelopes of certain buildings are put together, or what you can do with structural systems, and how you could tessellate them to make other structures. And so I think the books have different values, and I don't think that the latest one undermines the rest. However, I have learned through doing them. So I have learned through doing the ornament book. It led me to the form book, and the two have led me to the style book. So yes, in my mind, the previous two are kind of are replaced because the style book encapsulates the previous two. but that doesn't mean that as kind of artifacts and objects that they're not useful.
One more.
Yeah, the topic of differences that he was mentioning, I was wondering if there were some sort of supra agents that would establish the differences that you were mentioning a moment ago. For example, we see the two examples here on the screen, and I cannot help but think that each one is in a different society, different economy, different climatic regime, and that establishes a boundary by itself, does it not?
Well, at the time they were, but here we are making a kind of an archive of ideas about architecture. So when you shift, let's say, the convention from another project, it doesn't mean that those projects are not relevant or they were not relevant at the time. The buildings are physical entities that operate and perform in many different ways in their kind of location. And the Marina Tower and the Aqua Towers are great buildings in their own right, but they are also ideas that we have accumulated between us, and so they're equal right now. So if you were to make a balcony, you have a choice between them. And so that's why the projects are, in a way, there is a certain editing out of their kind of specifics that are not able to migrate, right? You could make the Aqua Tower in a different color. I don't think it will significantly change it.
Yeah, but the Aqua Tower in the tropics will perform in terms of energy different than the Aqua Tower.
Yes, it will, and that's one of the ways in which you could take it and shift it, right?
Yeah.
You could use the balconies as a way to shape the balconies below and respond to different orientations. That's one of the ways you can change it. But it exists as a system, as a set of conventions about how you organize balconies in a tall building.
We're going to actually continue the conversation a little bit outside. There will be a brief book signing just outside the door, so thank you again.